welcome to another episode of Talk'n TRM, the podcast dedicated to travel risk management. My name is Bex Deadman, also known as Travel Risk Bex. Thank you for joining us today. And we have a very special guest, another friend, because we all know that everybody on this podcast is a friend and we have to work out how you come into my life. So I met you actually through another really good friend of the show, Jennifer Milton. And she introduced us, I don't know, probably a couple of years ago now. It's been a little while, yeah? And we've actually done a few projects together and had a few things that are kind of maybe in the pipeline as well. So lots of exciting stuff. And I think what I particularly like about your experience is you come from a completely different side to where I do, which just complements what it is that we're talking about. But also this idea that travel risk management is much bigger than just high risk countries and putting stuff in place to look after people in critical situations. It's much bigger than this, and we have an opportunity here to bring everything together and perhaps evolve an industry that's been working in silos for the last since conception, I think it's fair to say. So without further ado, I'm so delighted. I'm just going to let our audience know. I think I've been trying to get this man's time, he's so busy, for about a year. So when I first set these podcasts up, I had this man in my mind to be on this show. So this is how long it's taken, and here he is. So without further ado, may I ask you, who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, thank you, Bex. I was not waiting for a year, but I was really looking forward for this because I since a year we know each other more or less. I love your enthusiasm about travel risk management, and we spoke a lot about silos and things like that. So I'm really looking forward for elaborating a little bit on my point of view of that. I think we agree. Sometimes we may disagree, and yeah. So thank you for having made this happen. My name is Birger Oldorff, German national, you might hear that, but living in Switzerland, have lived in different countries, continents, Africa, Canada, in Russia, etc., all over my life, and have always worked in the ecosystem of travel risk management. In times where nobody knew about the term travel risk management already, right? That is a new term, but the concept is still there. So it's about people traveling. It's about businesses traveling to make business. And so I've had the chance to. So let's put it a bit different. I've listened to your podcast, to many of your other interviews, and maybe you don't like that. I'm not a travel risk management expert. I'm sorry.
I don't mind.
It's the only thing I know, but I'm a business development expert, which hopefully gives me a different angle to the thing. It's about business. So people come and see me or hopefully work with me to make business, either because they have something nice to add or because they're looking for something nice to add. So that's what I'm doing. I had the chance to work alongside with amazing companies in the field. One of the pioneers, International SOS, some 25 years ago, where I was knocking the doors with other business developers and telling people, do you need somebody to pick up the phone when things go wrong? Even the term assistance wasn't there at the time. I have helped HC managers setting up clinics in remote sites. I've watched people writing medical evacuation plans. I've consulted with people who were writing travel risk management policies. Most of the time, I haven't done this myself, but I was lucky enough to follow these people. And some of those have been guests in your podcast, by the way. So it was always good to see old friends. You mentioned the term friends, still being around and helping developing this. That's basically who I am. And now I decided a few years ago to set up my own consultancy in the area, to start with really to do travel risk management a little bit like those people you interview. I quickly realized that there's real experts out there who might be better, right? What I've realized that those people do not have the time, or those people or those organizations, small or big, are enthusiastic about the topic, but struggle putting a value behind that, a value that is understood by a CFO. Why should we do that, right? And on the other side, I had CFOs knocking my door and said, well, there's this consultant knocking who wants to sell me some whatever tracking tools or communication tools, etc. Why should I do that? right? And this is where I'm concentrating as a consultant, Oldorff Consultancy, a few years now on the ground, mostly helping communication, helping people look at the other side of things, turning topics around, engaging communication, and bringing people together. That's what I'm doing, actually. It works pretty well because there's lots of people like you, Bex, out there, right? Enthusiastic, right? And there's technology, right? Same thing. And they all come, well, we do duty of care, right? And they're all doing well. What they struggle with is, again, making the connections between the silos, right? And at the end of the day, my clients want to make money in a positive way, or spend money in a wise way. And some have big budgets, some have small budgets, and this is what needs to be aligned. That's what I do.
That's you. Thank you. So let's just get into that a little bit. So I think you're absolutely right, and we've had lots of conversations, obviously, around this, and it's kind of where I sit in the travel side as well. Is that companies are limited on time, so they end up needing to outsource some of this stuff, be it the risk management, be it the travel management, but it kind of gets done in different areas, and then kind of 20 or 30 years down the line, when you've been outsourcing, you sort of lose a grip of what it is that actually it is that you do, because you only control it maybe from a budgetary perspective now, as opposed to, actually having the full picture, which is kind of what we talk about in travel risk management. But there has to be this reason to do it, right? And I think those of us that work in this space from a security side are much more, well, of course, why wouldn't you do it? This is your people, but there's got to be this translation up the chain to the executives to not only get the why, because they've got to be behind it, but also then put the budgets in place to allow this to happen. So what are some of the challenges that you face, or perhaps and I think this is pertinent just because a lot of our listeners are kind of in that middle tier. So they're working as maybe travel security managers or travel managers, and they have a role, but perhaps that role isn't quite as inclusive as they might want it to be across the travel management sphere, and they don't necessarily get the buy-in that they need, both from the top level, but actually often from the travelers as well. You have this kind of issue. So what are some of the challenges that you see that companies face around this that you kind of help with?
Well, people always, and this is natural, that's not only travel risk management, they try to go for the easy things, right? And there's things that are easy to understand, which actually is a positive thing, but it limits all of us a little bit. What can I take as an example in this ecosystem? Insurance, right? Well, I have insurance. That's one of the first things I heard 25 years ago. I still hear today. Well, I have insurance. Well, that's easy. That's a good start, right? And that's what I tell my clients. And making them, and insurance, by the way, is expensive, right? So it's a very good topic to engage people on. Well, is that money well spent? What do you want to achieve with insurance? Well, I want to be compliant. I don't want to go to pay for unexpected medical bills, right? And that's where then it's a bit tricky, because I don't want to talk about things that should not happen, like an employee losing an arm in a car accident. We don't want to talk about that. In the past, we had lots of providers who were trying to go this way. I think these days, none of my peers I work with is really going that way. So we really want to avoid things. So actually the story is, well, let's take insurance. Do you really want your insurance to be activated? Do you want that? Do you want them to pay a claim to compensate an employee for a loss? Do you want that? And this is where it starts, right? And it very easily links finance, which to actually reality, what we live, right? And we all work for things not to happen. We don't want that insurance, right? We don't want that plane taking off to Congo and bring out that employee or whatever remains from that employee, right? That's a reality statistically, and if we do our job right, will not happen. And this is tricky, right? And this is something that where I think aid providers need help, but buyers as well. And especially, but insurances or claims or money that goes out from a certain budget which wasn't expected, is always a good start. always a good start to get attention. Unfortunately, more than, well, there might be a car accident, right? Obviously, there's statistics out there. In the meantime, there's been research as well, like, well, I don't know, traffic accidents are the number one cause for medical evacuations, things like that, right? But it all depends, right? Where you are, what kind of project you have, etc. So that is the challenge, to get attention, and a little bit of the solution, right? Put numbers behind it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think I so agree with you with this kind of rhetoric around just putting all the kind of negative stuff out there that can happen. Like, there's a lot of noise around kidnap and ransom, for example. So insurance and training and being prepared. And whilst, yes, there is definitely a requirement for that and a place for that, actually the likelihood of that happening realistically is so low for most organizations. You should be aware, but that's not where we should start. And actually, when you start bolting that sort of stuff onto the insurance policies, that's obviously when things get really expensive. So do you need that at all? Or actually, should we be focusing on the other stuff, the stuff that happens all the time? You know, people getting people getting things stolen, people having minor medical incidences. And actually, it's that stuff that we seem to go a little bit wrong with. And I hear you, like, I hear the same conversation. The answer, depending on what you're selling or what you're talking about, the answer is either I've already got insurance, thanks, or I work with a global TMC, thanks, or I work with a global assistance company, thanks. And that's kind of where it stops, as if that's the kind of answer for when stuff goes wrong. And the bit we're missing is the proactively working out what might go wrong and trying to prevent it from happening in the first place, I guess. And that's why this conversation for me around insurance is always really, really interesting, because it is just this go-to, and people don't really even know their policies or what they're included or all of these sort of things. They just kind of go, oh yeah, we've got cover. And what we're really trying to get to in travel risk management is that's a great place to start, isn't it? You know, well, what have you got cover for? And let's sort of just take it back
What you
from there and actually learn it.
Yeah. Um, our counterparts in the organizations, companies, might not think about TRM, trust management. I know you're experiencing a little bit with terms as well. I know you're doing that, and that's perfectly right. So when I speak either with companies or providers, is to find the trigger. Insurance is easy, but there's other topics out there who are very much linked. Let's take travel risk management, the ISO standards, right? That you are very enthusiastic with, right? That's crisis management, right? Crisis management might get their attention or not. Business resilience, risk financing, mobility, or workplace safety, or simply employee benefit, right? So the trick is really to not to get these businesses at the moment in that point, which is a pain point, which is not a pain point, which is something that they understand, right? And every business, small or big, is somewhere there, right? They might be in an RFP where certain standards needs to be met just to win the business. They need to do things, right? So that's business. That's not business continuity. That's sales, right? That's they might be in a situation where they have an economic downturn and need to lay off people, right? So what should I do to motivate the remainings, right? Or things like that. So and travel risk management can be part of the solution or part of travel risk management, right? Is it information? Is it things like that? So it's really about finding out, as a provider, for example, well, your provider, when they come and see me, step back. Are you really doing business travel risk management, or are you just helping companies being more profitable? Or what is the overall goal you want to achieve with your product, with your client? And on the other hand, do the same again. So the term is easy, it's simple, but it's so large, right? And sometimes too large to focus, right? Insurance is, again, insurance is 90% of the times always a good start, right? And then it goes somewhere. So
I hear you. No, and I think that's exactly where we tend to start, where I try and get companies to start when I'm working with them, and they kind of throw me a travel and expense policy, and I'm like, okay, let's just that's the end point. let's push back to actually where this comes from. So let's get into your I really want to dig into your why, Birger. I really want to understand a little bit about, what drives you in this space, because, you've just sort of explained that you've been, you were there with ISOS right at, 25 years ago, and understanding it kind of from that side. And I talk to, as you'll know, many of my guests that have been doing this for a long time. And actually, it's quite exhausting having to kind of try and go into businesses and explain why this stuff is important. I need a bit of resilience yourself. Obviously, you've worked out some great ways to kind of have these conversations, but what is it that drives you in this space? What is it that makes you do this?
Actually, it started a long time before these 25 years. As a child already, I'm going to cover that in a second. But as I mentioned to you, I'm a business developer by heart, by education, and this is always complex sale. It's complex because there's no easy solution, and it's fun. Really, it's fun. It's fun having this conversation, helping understanding where organizations want to go. It's always about culture. It's always cultures in cultures, because it's all over the world. It's global. It's travel. It's really nice, right? And that motivates me every day. No, but why did I come there? Actually, it started long before International SOS. I was myself an expat child, right? So my mom and my dad moved me to Mali close to 50 years ago, right?
Not possible. Not possible.
Possible. And Mali at the time was, well, calmer politically, but in terms of medical infrastructure, not easy, right? So we lived a lot of things. I tried to give you 2 or 3 examples. So we continued to, so my dad was working for one large organization, very well known. Well, you would say today, well, they have everything in place, right? Before that cost, I thought about how, what was the first time I did myself get in touch with travel risk management. At the time, we were in Zaire, Congo now, in Kivu region, which is Lake of Kivu, very nice, scenic, a bit like Switzerland, but pretty remote, right? And at the time, the country was called Zaire. Mobutu was the leader at the time, and everybody said, "Well, this is a horrible place because one day this will be a disaster, political, whatever things. So you guys need to be prepared." So I tried to remember. So nothing really happened from the organization, but we were living at a lake, and the next neighbor country was Rwanda, a very calm and peaceful country. So he said, well, if something goes wrong, you go to Rwanda. So how do we go to Rwanda? So the travel risk management solution was to buy a inflatable boat for the family to jump into the boat if something goes wrong and to go to Rwanda. So we bought the boat, a little motor, etc.
Yeah.
No, it was a plan. It was 30 years ago. Yeah. More than 30 years ago. This boat became my best toy, right? It was funny. Nothing really happened, but the boat was a toy more than anything else, right? And at the end of the day, it was not Congo, which ended in a disaster at that time. In the meantime, yes, but Rwanda, right?
Yeah.
So don't want to go into details of history, but that's what happened, right? I had medical is actually much more frequent than political things, right? So we had medical incidents. There was no infrastructure. We had a colleague of my father who had a bleeding spleen, right? Spleen is the right word, is next to the liver. And who nearly died, right? And they called people like me, 11, 12 years old guy. Well, he has the same blood group of you, right? So he was taking blood from everywhere, literally,
wow.
Right? So there was, etc. So things like no infrastructure, no planes, no evacuation, all these things. Oh, I didn't decide at the time, well, I'm going to do travel risk management, but it came back much later. So that helped me later on to when I met International SOS to understand what they do, why they do it, right?
Yeah.
And so that company was pretty unprepared at the time. And it's still the case, not for that company, but wherever I show up with large organizations where the solution is still an inflatable boat, or not even that. So I'm still seeing that every day. Yeah. So that history plus these amazing people that I've met over my career in medicine, in security, in planning, in even desktop, right? In call centers, right? Yeah. By the way, part of my family members are in the same business, right? Still today. So that's something which still motivates me every day. So that's travel risk management and making the world a little bit better. Obviously, making a living, etc., as well, was something I like to do. Is what motivates me. And there's still a lot of things to do. So we are far away from a perfect world.
We're so far away from a perfect world. Thank you. Wow, I didn't know that. This is what I love. Like I could talk to you so many times, and I had no idea. It's great. Wow. I think that's so interesting because you've literally experienced firsthand what it is like to be in, in a country that is completely different from perhaps a European country or a US country or whatever. And that can be swap the other way as well, right? Expats are everywhere. That's the point. And how are we as organizations? And this is a huge piece for HR in companies and mobility and immigration. And this is where, again, 31030 can really kind of help give a structure and kind of start piecing these things together. But wow, I just find as soon as you said random, I just went, oh, that was your plan, obviously knowing. And but fortunate you didn't need to go that way. Obviously you had to go the other way. But then you look at these some of these countries now, and there's still stuff happening, and there's still people being sent out. I remember talking about what travel risk management was to a gentleman once who ran an organization, small consultancy firm, and he didn't understand why you'd need a travel management company. And obviously I was doing that role at the time. And I just sort of said, well, because we obviously go with the duty of care piece as TMCs, rightly or wrongly. And I said, well, do you have people that you send to travel anywhere in the world? And he said, well, yes, everyone's really proud of that. Yes, all over the world, la la la. Okay, well, where is someone now? And he said, oh, I've got someone in Uganda right now. And I was like, oh, right. And how did you book that? And he went, I just told him to book some flights and to book hotels, and off he went. And I was my heart obviously just went, now, there's no issues with Uganda. I'm not trying to pick out Uganda as a specific country. The reason I'm picking it out is that there are particular laws in Uganda that are pretty strict compared to other regions, especially in the LGBTQI community. So to not have the kind of understanding that could be a situation that any traveller could find themselves in is just frightening. But that is just, it kind of echoes a lot of it, because we have this sort of bravado with travel that, well, we don't think of the weakest member of our team or the most vulnerable member of the team. We build policies based on the strongest member of the teams, the executives, the CEOs, the risk takers, the ones that run the organization. But the crazy thing, and then we build security around them, because ultimately them at the game is an issue for the company. But we really need to be thinking about this from the sort of the weakest point. And what I mean by that is the most vulnerable point. And that could be a 16-year-old who's never traveled anywhere before and is just being sent off to book their own travel and all that kind of stuff. It's insane. Um, wow. Now, told you it would go fast. 20. We're already
I
in.
can give plenty of examples if you want, but anyway.
No, I am happy for examples. So let's do that. And then I think and then as we've gone through some of your tips as you've been doing this, but yeah, let's get into some stories as and when you can, because that's exactly what this is about. And then let's end with your golden nuggets. So please, Birger, you have the floor. And examples, because you've hinted now.
I have an example for the first one. You just mentioned briefly policies, those writing policies, right? A golden nugget is, if you're on the business, either on the buyer side, on the procurement side, or even a traveler or whoever, a project manager, etc., don't trust it. Or a policy is not enough. And insurance is not enough. A policy is not. I'll give you an example. I later on became an expat with my young family. Same thing. Didn't want to go to Mali, but was a 2-year-old to Russia, right? And my family wasn't still there, so I had my first week, and they came over and said, "Well, here's a bunch of pile of papers which you need to sign." So I signed a anti-bribery policy. I signed another policy, and there was a seatbelt policy as well, which I signed. And because I was a tough negotiator, I negotiated a car, a company car for me and my family when they came over. So roughly a week later, my family was about to come over, and I got my car with driver, nice in Russia. A car without seatbelts. the same company. I didn't even realize. It was my wife who realized that I won't drive in this, right? Not with the kids. So that company gave me a policy, which I signed, pretending, well, when he signed that, he's responsible. We won't go into details who's responsible. You know the story. Many here who will listen to that know what that is, who's responsible. Duty of care is not delegable. It is not, right? Yeah. I know that now. And that was a real case, right? We finally drove around 5 years with a car without seatbelts. But still, right? That's an example. And don't trust the policy. It's not hope. It is reality. Look at the reality, and sometimes you need compromises. Yes, again, it's about budget. In this case, it was a pure budget decision, most likely budgetarial, which has a consequence. So it's not about good or bad. It's just about understanding what's going on.
And I think being realistic about what's going on, because often a policy can just sort of mask everything and go, well, it'll be all right because we've got this policy. Whereas the reality of it is just it's not kind of fit for purpose. That's the
to be honest, at that time, Russia was full of Ladas and Volgas, right? There were no or few cars with seatbelts, right? That's a reality. Again, who's here to blame? It's another question. We don't have time for that, right? But it's a reality. Right, and today the reality is a little bit different. People, Generation Z, for example, right? Oh, we want to have freedom. We want to drive in motorbikes without helmets through Thailand. As an employee of whatever organization, right? These are realities, right? So a policy is either evolving or not the reality. It's just a starting point, right? Second, it's the second and third one's more the same. It's an invest, right? An organization is looking at travel risk management, duty of care, however you want to name it, is investing in something to make a profit, right? And keep that in mind. When you use the service as a traveler, or when you produce the service together with a provider, or when you sell the service, right? There's always, it's not just having investing in a research on safe airlines, if you only fly anyway on British Airways in and out, right? It isn't worth spending the money, right? Just a simple example. So it's always about why do I want to do that, right? What do I want to achieve? And there are certain things which are for a certain company, a certain situation, useless, right? Just because travel risk management is fancy and everybody needs it or understands it better, it is not always the solution, or not everything is a solution, right? You don't need to do the same thing as a Siemens. In terms of investment, if you're a small company who's winning your first project in Saudi Arabia, well, you need to be realistic as well, right? So that's a reality. That there's a value behind that. Value is human, obviously. So how to valorize a life is maybe something, but again, it's if there is no value in keeping a project safe, well, think about the project itself. Is that worth to do that or not? But again, we are living in times where there is inflation. There is there's a lot of things happening these days, and companies really questioning that cost are right doing so, right? They just need to ask the right questions to find the right answers. And being low on travel risk management in terms of money might be okay. You just need to know why you do that and what the consequences are and how you offset this. So this is more or less my third and second nugget here. And it's tremendously interesting working on these kind of, or having these kind of conversations with the industry.
I agree with you completely. And I think it's this kind of, I talk about it as trying to kind of get into the detail, right? That's the nitty gritty of this, because for so long we've had this kind of blanket approach, which when you're kind of managing travel from a financial perspective, which most organizations are, you can kind of understand why that approach is okay, because you can only really manage what you can see. So for years, they kind of managed through the data through the TMC, so the air data or maybe some hotel data. And then as those kind of sectors get smaller on spend, they kind of get less interesting, or you just physically can't have the data on it. That's fine from a cost perspective. And it's kind of the argument and the conversation we've been having in the travel industry for years. But when you bring in duty of care responsibility and you're managing by risk, that's a whole different conversation. All that stuff that you can't see, You now need to work out a way of seeing it. And if you can't see it, then say, well, we can't see it and this is what we understand. Because this is the point of being able to write any of this stuff well. We don't need this blanket approach. If you're a company and you're only going to, I don't know, Europe, and then suddenly, let's take your example, you've now got a contract in Saudi Arabia, you need to be able to focus on that. So, what have you got in place for what you were doing previously? And now, what do you need to do to extend and make sure those people are protected? There's no point at that point going out to a global whatever and saying, oh, you know, we might do this, we might do that, because that's not going to give you what you need, and you're just going to end up in this kind of big bucket with everybody else. And actually then when something, if an incident was to happen as a much smaller organization, you're not actually going to be as high up on their agenda to be looking after either. So it's about finding the right fit for the right organization, and the only way you can do that is know what your organization is doing and what they want to do, and bring all of that together. We talk a lot about, you know, TRM should be part of your overall strategic approach, because it helps you, it enables you to travel, it enables you to go to markets that you may not have considered before, because you've suddenly got a different approach. But we don't think about it like that. We just do it as this kind of cost to manage over here. And I think it's really interesting when you start having these conversations with companies around this, that in order to do it, and we haven't talked about this enough, you need to get them out of their silos to have this kind of strategic level of conversation to get everybody on the same page, right?
Yeah, and taking the last statement that you said, just getting everybody on the same page. My experience is small or big companies, organizations that are a little bit organized, right? In terms of there's an HR department, there is a finance department, there is a sales department, etc. Once you make them speak and ask the right questions, you very often find out that a lot of elements of what you will find in insurers management are already there. They just need to be uncovered. So sometimes about, well, here it is. It's already paid for. Use it, right? Exactly. Oh my God, I didn't know that HR has purchased it. I didn't know that the head of sales has subscribed to or is always working with a meet and greet service when he goes to Asia or she or the team. It's we didn't know. We just need to, yeah. A lot of things are already there. We need to structure it, right? So companies are not dumb, right? They're not. Most of them who are in business are doing well. Right? Now there's stage coming on top. The world is changing. It's always worth to re-ask the questions and recalibrate, etc. That's worse. But in most cases, travelers today, travelers maybe not, because things need to still be aligned, right? But it's not too complex with the right questions, and people like yourself, maybe myself, or those who are attending this podcast, to set up something reasonable.
Agreed. And I think that, and actually the small, there's two sides of it, isn't there? There's the large organizations and the globals who are potentially in their silos, and then you've got the SMEs who have got kind of one or two people wearing all these roles and responsibilities of stuff that they might not even know about, because they might be an expert in part of that, but then suddenly they're taking over all these other responsibilities. And I always think with travel, you know, where does the responsibility sit? You know, if a company doesn't define that, is it the traveler? Is it the person booking it? None of that really is the case. It's the organization, right? I mean, ultimately in the UK, the CEO. But that's not how it's done, and it's just not how it's thought about. I don't want to do this, but we're coming to the end. I can't believe it. So before we go, is there anything that you would like to say to our listeners as a final Birger, whatever?
Keep listening. What these people in this podcast are telling you, keep listening. And I think most of us are happy to exchange and to talk about what we know, right? We don't know how to build a car or to fly a plane, but we know risk management, right? And most of them are excited. Most of us are excited about doing that. So ask the question when you read something in a newspaper. It's not just because it says, well, whatever, there's this and this happening in country X, that it will ultimately affect you. Pick up the phone, talk to us, and we'll be keen guiding you, right? And if there is something missing, we'll probably tell you, right? And it's going to be good. It's always been good so far.
It has, and I think, yeah, I think with the standards and the place that they're in, I think this is an opportunity for us all to evolve together, and that's a lot of what I'm trying to do with this podcast, trying to kind of just say that these are all the different areas. Go and find the bit that you're interested in. Go and do the bit that's the low hanging fruit for you, and then expand and start thinking about what that looks like across other areas. But actually, it's a really, and I've said this again and again on the podcast. My favorite bit when I go into any corporate is that stakeholder engagement, bringing them all together and talking about travel risk management. It's like this, and it's just talking about what you were saying when you go, well, you have already got that and you have got this. It's like this umbrella that brings everything together, yet gives it purpose. So all your DEI policies, all of your mental health policies, all of those things that you have suddenly have purpose when people are traveling. And that's when they're tested. That's when this stuff is actually worth its mettle. Um, Thank you so much. I've absolutely loved talking to you, as I knew I would. So, everybody, you've been listening to another episode of Talking TRM with beautifully, softly spoken Birger Oldorff, based in Switzerland but is German. Just bringing again a completely different perspective. And I was on mute when you were saying I might not like this. Of course, I like this. This is exactly what it's about. This is about enterprising business. This is about optimizing business. This is about using this stuff wisely to get to where we want to be, but seeing it as part of the overall solution. So, to our lovely listeners, we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time. To our lovely guests, have a lovely afternoon. You've been listening to Talking TRM, the podcast dedicated to travel risk management. My name is Bex Deadman, also known as Travel Risk Bex. Take care, and we will see you in another couple of weeks.